Hello, welcome back to El Chef Bigotes. Today, we're going to be talking about meat thermometers. So meat thermometers are a very, very essential part of cooking. I'm even going to call it mission critical piece of equipment that you will need when you're cooking different types of meats. And not only when you're outside grilling, it could be when you're outside smoking meats. Matter of fact, we'll even be using thermometers in the kitchen, whether you're cooking over the stovetop or whether you're cooking in the oven. Thermometers can come in very, very handy because it's also going to help you ensure that not only do you cook to the appropriate temperature from a food safety perspective, but also you want the food to be tasting good. You don't want it to get dried out. You don't want it to be undercooked. You don't want it to be overcooked. And so therefore, that's when these types of thermometers come in very handy. So today we're going to be talking about 3 types of thermometers. Okay, first, it's what is called an instant thermometer. It's a very simple handheld device, very economical. You can get these as low as $10 to $20, perhaps at the hardware store, perhaps at a big market store, or even online. But this is essential. This is almost something I use on a daily basis. And again, I use it outside when I'm grilling, outside when I'm smoking, or even inside the kitchen as well. Then there's one that's called a wireless type of instant thermometer, and we'll talk about the applications for that as well. And last but absolutely not least, because I say that because it's a very, very useful tool, especially when you're smoking meats, we're going to be talking about our wired thermometers. So let's start. Let's start by talking about our handheld instant meat thermometer. These are very, very useful and they're very versatile. They can be used to check the internal temperature of any kind of protein. I also use it even to check the tenderness, for example, of a baked potato. I use it to check the internal temperature of any kind of protein. You can also check the temperature when you're deep frying. You want to make sure that the oil is not too cold or too hot. You can check all of those temperatures with this type of thermometer. And it truly is called an instant thermometer for a reason. As soon as you probe the meat or whatever it is you're checking the temperature on, it will give you an instant read. And so a little bit later in the video, we're going to talk a little bit more about what temperatures you need to cook different types of proteins, different types of meats, different types of even veggies and things of that nature. But this instant thermometer, I would suggest you go and get one right away as you start your venture into grilling, because it will come in very, very handy to ensure that you're cooking the meat properly. It will ensure that anything you're cooking is cooked to the right temperature. Again, you don't want to be undercooked, you don't want to be overcooked. So that's the instant thermometer. The other type of thermometer that I like to talk about is called a wireless thermometer. So these typically come as little probes that look kind of like this. They're ceramic, they withstand a lot of heat. These two come in very handy. Okay, these I typically would use when you're cooking perhaps a thicker steak, perhaps a cowboy steak, a tri-tip, a tomahawk steak. And so you leave these inside while it's cooking, and it's app based, so you have the app on your phone. It'll be monitoring the temperature of whatever protein you'll be cooking. Throughout the cook, you can be monitoring the temperature through your phone or a tablet. And that way when you reach the desired temperature. I do like these kind of thermometers. They do work well. The app is good. Just a couple of things to keep in mind, and I'm sure they vary depending on the different brands. One of the things that is kind of an inconvenience on this particular brand, this happens to be the Maverick BT-32 model. What I've noticed is that the app is good. It's not as intuitive to set it up, but once you set it up, the app is pretty user-friendly. It's got really nice graphics on it, pretty easy to use. It kind of looks like that there. And so you can see each probe, what the temperature is, in case you're doing up to 2 different kinds of meats. The reason I do like the fact that it has 2 probes is because I'm going to say that one of the disadvantages is that the battery doesn't last very long. It charges very quickly, 2 to 3 minutes, it fully charges. But it only works for 3 hours of cook time, which if you're going to do something like a tri-tip or even a tomahawk or a cowboy steak, you'll be fine, because those will cook in under 3 to 4 hours anyways. However, if you're going to get into a bigger cut of meat, if you're going to start smoking, for example, a a pork butt or a brisket or a prime rib roast, for example. Those take many hours to smoke. And so you'd have to keep changing these out every like 3 hours as the battery dies. And so therefore I don't typically use this type of probe for a really long cook. I use it for more of the up to 3 hour perhaps cook. Then these come in very handy. They work out very well. There is another disadvantage with this particular app as well, is that what I noticed is that two things. One is it says it has like a 30-foot range before you lose the signal. I find that it's more like 15 or 20 feet. So I can't go very far with my phone away from the grill when using this kind of probe because it loses connection. The other, and perhaps the biggest disadvantage of all, is that this particular app requires two things. One is you can't allow the phone to go to sleep. If the phone goes to sleep, it loses connection. The other thing is that you have to keep the app on all the time. You can't switch to other apps. For example, when I'm grilling, I always like to be listening to music. Well, I can't switch over to a music app while I'm using this app on my phone to track the temperature of the meat. And so it's a big inconvenience, you know. So what I typically do is I have a tablet and I'll hook up the tablet to the thermometer, and in that way I can use my phone to be checking my text messages or checking music and all that kind of thing. So kind of a disadvantage, but there's a good workaround. If you have another device that you can connect to it, you can use that as well. But overall, I do suggest these type of wireless thermometers as a very good option. And now let's talk about my favorite thermometer. And so that happens to be the wired thermometer. This particular brand that I have here is called the ThermPro is the brand. I've had a few of the different models, good brands. I really like these. This one happens to be the TP25 is the model number on this. It has 4 probes. They have models that only have 2 probes. They have some that have 4 probes. I recommend the 4 probe. And you might say, why on earth do we need 4 probes? Keep in mind that one of the probes is going to be used to monitor the internal temperature of the chamber in which you're cooking in, the ambient temperature. The other 3 probes are the ones that you'd be able to use to monitor the temperature, the internal temperature of the proteins that you're cooking. So for example, there's times where I might be smoking a tri-tip, smoking some chicken, and smoking some ribs, for example, all at the same time. In that case, you want to be monitoring each one of those separately because they're not all going to cook exactly at the same time. And so this allows you to monitor the internal temperature of the chamber in addition to 3 other meats or other proteins that you might be cooking. Another example is perhaps you're cooking 3 different steaks, 3 different thick steaks. Well, they're not always exactly the same. And the other thing is, depends on where you put them inside the smoker, inside the chamber. One side's going to cook a little faster than the other. So it's also going to help you monitor the temperature of the different steaks inside the chamber so that you know when it's time to rotate them. When you notice that a couple of the steaks are cooking way faster than the other 2, maybe you just rotate those around. And so it's important to do that because obviously you want to kind of finish your cook all at the same time. So these are one of my favorite types of very user-friendly. You can see it's got the 4 screens right there. The app itself is also very user-friendly. This one you can see here that it monitors on the app very well. You can set up alarms. You can set up the alarm, for example, on the chamber when you're smoking. If you want to be between 225 and 275, you can set the alarm so it goes off when it drops below 225, or you can set an alarm when it goes up above 275, and that way you can react accordingly. Very user-friendly. I really recommend this type of thermometer. This thermometer, you probably don't really need it until you start getting into smoking of meats, right? When you're going into the longer cooks, your pork butts, your briskets, perhaps also the prime rib roast is when I primarily would use this. But you can use it for short cooks as well if this is the only one you have. You have options. It depends obviously on perhaps your budget. In regards to the budget, as I mentioned earlier, the little instant thermometer, you can pick it up just about anywhere. There's different brands, different price ranges. Between $10 and $20 is probably what you should expect to pay for one of these. The wireless ones are probably some of the more expensive. You can get some as low as probably $60, $70. I've seen them go as high as like $200. And so it just depends on the brand, obviously, and where you buy it. You can get them online. You can get them at different retailers. These are not. These are relatively economical as well because you get a good use out of these. I've had these for years, and you can get these for as low as like $50, $60. There's some that are a little more advanced. Might get into a little bit over $100. But for the most part, you really don't need to spend much more than maybe $50, $60 to get yourself a decent wired meat thermometer. And they come in very, very handy. Like I said, not only handy, they're absolutely essential. So with all of that said, let's talk a little bit about what temperatures do we need to cook the meat to. That's very important. So let's talk about that next. So we have now your meat thermometer. So now you need to know up to what temperature you're going to cook your different kinds of meats and proteins. Let's start with seafood. So seafood needs to be cooked up to 145 degrees internal. And so have you ever made shrimp, for example, and then it ends up being like gummy, rubbery, tough? That's probably because you cooked it up to the 160s, 170, or perhaps even more. Shrimp is going to cook very, very quickly. So a lot of times the mistake that people make is they leave it on way too long. So again, take your instant thermometer, check the inside of the shrimp. And what I would suggest you do is when you get to about 142, 143, remove it off the heat source. Okay, so whether you're doing it on a skillet, whether over the stove, whether you're doing it in the oven, whether you're doing it out on a grill, once you get to about 142, 143, remove it off the heat source, and you're going to let it rest for a few minutes. And during that time, you're going to have what's called carryover heat or carryover cooking, and it will get up to that 145 degrees. Also in the seafood category, let's talk about fish a little bit. So fish, for example, some of the fish, you can order it also much like you would order beef, rare, medium, well done. Perhaps the two more common types of fish that can be ordered at different temperatures are salmon and tuna. And matter of fact, it can even be raw. As you know, people eat sushi, sashimi. But if you're going to grill it or cook it or broil it, you can go up to 145 as well. You can go a little bit under that. I wouldn't go much more than 145 because that's when it's going to start getting dry. And so throughout this channel, I'll be showing different methods of cooking salmon, either on a stovetop, in an oven, or even on a grill. We'll be doing some cedar plank and some cedar wrapped salmon, which comes out fantastic. The next thing we could talk about is poultry. Now poultry, such as chicken and turkey, and perhaps even duck, you want to cook it up to 165 degrees. Perhaps one of the trickiest portions of chicken to cook are the breasts, because the breasts typically are very thick. A lot of people, what they'll decide to do instead is they'll butterfly them or even kind of fillet them into thin pieces just because it makes it easier to cook. And you can absolutely do that if you like. But if you prefer a nice, thick chicken breast, whole, and still remain very juicy and flavorful, you want to monitor the internal temperature and get it to 165 degrees. Now, once again, what you can do is get it up to like 162, 163, remove it off the heat source, let it rest covered, perhaps 10, 15 minutes. That's going to allow the juices to kind of accumulate inside of the chicken breast, and then it's going to get up to the desired 165 degrees. But if you do that, and again, now that we talked about the instant thermometers, you can monitor out throughout the cook, make sure you get to that desired temperature, and you're going to see that your chicken breasts are going to come out flavorful, they're going to come out juicy, they're going to come out delicious, okay? They're not, no more dry chicken breasts. Now, let's talk about beef. Here we're going to get into a debatable subject, almost controversial at times. To what temperature do you want to cook your beef? Well, some people like it very rare. Some people like it well done. Some people like it medium rare. Some people like it medium. Well, you know, a lot of it is preference. A lot of people like well done. I don't suggest well done for many reasons. One is you're losing the flavor. You're losing the juiciness. You might as well just gnaw on a charcoal briquette. Okay, it's like chewing on the sole of a tennis shoe. Some people, I understand, that's what they prefer. but you're losing out on all the flavor and all the tenderness when you go to well done. So if you like well done, more power to you. We just can't be friends, I'm sorry. However, the different temperatures, and I'm going to be showing a graph here. If you like rare, it's going to be somewhere between 120 to 125 degrees internal temperature. A lot of people, including yours truly, highly prefers medium rare. Medium rare is probably the most common. It is that you're looking at about 125 to 130 degrees internal temperature. Yes, it's very pink inside. It's nice and seared on the outside, but it's also very juicy. It's very flavorful. It's extremely tasty. You're going to absolutely love it. If you haven't tried it, I suggest that you do, because that's truly enjoying the actual cut of meat. And then you can get into the medium, and then there's medium well, and then obviously there's well done. So if you want your meat cooked rare, you're going to want to cook it up to like 120 to 125 degrees internal. If you want to go to a medium rare, then you want to go to 130, 135. If you want to cook more of a medium, or it's a little bit less pink, you're going to go to 140, 145. If you want very little pink, that's more of a medium well. So that's going to be about 145 to 150. And then if you want well done, again, bland, kind of tasteless, not very good. But if that's what you prefer, no problem. You'd want to cook it to at least 160 degrees. If you remove it off the heat source at about 160, you should still be able to save at least a little bit of the juiciness of it. If you go much further than that, it's going to get really dry, so I wouldn't recommend that at all. In addition to that, there is one other temperature that you can ask for or you can cook. There is something called blue rare. And blue rare is basically extra rare, and you'd want to remove it off the heat source at about 110. Now, I wouldn't recommend you doing that unless you know that the quality of meat is pretty good, at least a prime level or higher, because 110 degrees is pretty raw. You might even still hear it move from time to time as you're cutting it. So you want to make sure it's a good quality meat, because it also won't taste very good if you try to do a blue rare on a low quality cut of meat. But that is another option, blue rare. So as a rule of thumb, if you kind of want to try to kind of memorize the different temperatures of cooking beef, rare, you can say 120, and then just go in 10 degree increments. So you can say rare at about 120, medium rare is 130, medium is 140, medium well is 150, and then well done is at about 160. Now, when we talk about these temperatures, those are like the temperatures that you want to remove the meat off the heat source. Because remember, when you take beef off of the heat source, you're going to want to let them rest for a few minutes. And as you let them rest, the temperature will climb a few degrees. And so if you're going to err on one side versus the other, you want to undercook the meat, right? So for example, if you're really trying to hit a nice medium rare, you want to remove it off the heat source, maybe 128, 130, okay? And if you cut into it and you find that, oh no, it's a little too rare still for me, you can always put it back on the grill and cook it a little bit more. Where you can't do that the other way around, right? Once you overcook it, there's no going back. I compare that like when you go to get a haircut. If they leave it a little too long, they can always shorten it a little bit. They cut it too short, and you're just gonna have to wait a couple weeks for it to grow back. So the same with the meat. If you're gonna err, try to undercook it a little bit first until you kind of get used to it. But again, once you're using your instant thermometer, it's gonna really help you ensure that you hit to that right temperature, and it's gonna cook your steak exactly the way you want it every time. One other thing to notate as well is that these same ranges or cooking temperatures also apply to lamb. So follow the same guidelines when you're cooking lamb. What I would recommend, if you truly want to enjoy a good cut of steak, a good cut of beef, especially if you're spurging a little bit and you're getting the prime cut, try to downgrade little by little. See if you can get used to it. If you're used to well done, try medium well. Try just a little bit of pink inside. And then after you start to enjoy that a little bit, because you're going to find that it has a different and better flavor, then maybe you're going to go to the medium. And then over time, maybe you start going and graduating to the medium rare, which is really the highly recommended temperature so that you can truly enjoy a good cut of steak. Now let's talk a little bit about pork. So pork also has a little bit of a range, but you certainly don't want to ever serve it rare. The recommended range for pork is between 145 and 160. And so for pork, at 145, you're going to probably still see a little bit of pink. I personally do not like pink at all in pork. And so therefore I cook it to at the very least 150 to 160. Usually I'll let it go until maybe low 150s and then remove it from the heat source so that it gets closer to the 160 when it's done resting. And that way there's absolutely no pink inside of the pork. Again, kind of a personal preference on my behalf, but you are safe to cook your pork between 145 and 160. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned. Get yourself some of these meat thermometers. Trust me, you're going to thank me later. They're essential. You must have them. They're going to help you tremendously. They're going to make you a better cook because of it. And so go out and get yourself, start with the instant thermometer, and then later get yourself maybe one of the cordless ones or get one of the corded, the wired ones. But definitely, this is something you're going to need if you want to take your cooking to the next level. So that's it for now. Sas y tan tan. Welcome back to El Chef Bigotes. Today, we're going to be talking. So I hope that helped. Please go out and get yourself at least the